The adventure-era titles introduced multiple unique gameplay styles to the series. This type of thing was a common trend in platformers back then. Logically, this was done to help change pace to make sure the game didn't feel too repetitive, providing a variety of different gameplay experiences in order to keep gameplay from growing stale. But most games would usually throw them in haphazardly, and even if they were interesting or fun, they would usually show up briefly, then rarely, if not just never be used again. The adventure titles structured the game around multiple different characters, and attributed each of them with their own unique gameplay. This made it so all of them were technically fleshed out, and didn't feel like brief distractions. However, the variety present in Adventure 1 proved to be more quantity than quality, so Adventure 2 would shave it down to 3 distinct styles. However, despite carrying over into 2, one of them is still regarded with infamy, that playstyle being the treasure hunting stages. This gameplay style originated as Knuckles collecting shards of the Master Emerald after it broke apart. This was a fitting premise for the gameplay, but removed from it, the logic behind this gameplay being present in the games felt intrusive. So it seemed like it didn't belong, especially in the long term. And while I wouldn't call this gameplay a hidden gem, it feels weird in retrospect to see just how much people hated it. Personally, it's a gameplay style that I only really feel indifference towards, and that's because it doesn't really do anything good or bad. While working on a Chow Garden retrospective in Adventure 1, I came to find Knuckles was the best way to farm for animals. Over that time spent in them, I started thinking more about those stages, so I decided to take a retrospective look into these treasure hunting stages as a whole, actually evaluating them for what they are, discussing what about it makes it fall flat in gameplay, and what could have been done to make it far better. The way these stages work is pretty simple. You're thrown into an open stage and meant to hunt down 3 shards of the Master Emerald. To track down these shards, you have a radar. There are 3 separate slots on the radar for each piece. When you get close to a shard, they beep more frequently as well as change color. While inactive, they're gray. When you start to get close to a shard, it'll start beeping with a blue icon. When you start getting closer, it becomes green. When it's nearby, it becomes yellow. And when you're right on it, it becomes red. The colors vary by game, with SA2 just removing the blue, but it's extremely easy to understand just by playing. Adventure 1's radar has it so all the slots can go off at the same time, granted the pieces are in a close enough proximity. These stages are really small, so the fact that it tracks all 3 at a time means that it's very easy to breeze through them. When recording footage for this video, I legitimately knocked out all the stages in 13 minutes playing casually, and most of that time was spent getting to the stages. There's not a whole lot of substance to their inclusion in the game. There's even a hint system to help you find the shards faster if you're really struggling. You can find Tikal around the stage, and interacting with her will make her direct you to where a shard is. Doing this doesn't have a relevant downside in Adventure 1, and it certainly isn't necessary. Since the stages are small and the radar already makes it easy enough, it just feels like overkill. Part of what makes Sonic as a series so fun, regardless of the gameplay style, is your ability to complete stages faster through skill and knowledge, mastering the controls of the character and using them in ways that save time. Things like using the spin dash to skip ahead on a stage. It's gameplay with satisfying player expression. The design of these treasure hunting stages doesn't really have that level of expression in its gameplay, since you're just hunting 3 randomized items placed in static areas. The only expression of speed is memorizing all of the possible locations and cycling between them as fast as you can. There isn't anything dynamic to the gameplay itself. There are no controls as Knuckles that make the gameplay faster or more engaging, so it's not really an interesting gameplay style. It feels like gameplay variety for the sake of it. Knuckles has 5 stages and they mostly retain the same exact gameplay loop. You fly around the entire stage until you find all the shards. There's not really an evolution of the gameplay that makes it into a more fun or interesting experience. Casinopolis has more verticality and specific nukes to look into, but that doesn't really add much of a unique twist on gameplay itself. Red Mountain introduces the fact that shards can be hidden in walls or the ground, utilizing the dig upgrade in the stages, but it's possible there isn't even a spawn that requires you to dig, making this upgrade feel worthless if not just shallow. Since just like Casinopolis, this doesn't really meaningfully shake up gameplay, and Lost World doesn't really attempt to introduce a new gimmick. It's only the final stage that has a hint of design that meaningfully shakes up gameplay. Unfortunately, it doesn't really do it in a good way. SkyDeck's main gimmick is the physical direction of the stage. There's a lever that lets you change the angle of the ship, changing how gravity affects the environment. This is actually an interesting premise and concept, since the stage actually has dynamic interactions. However, the cracks are very apparent. For starters, the actual feel of traversal with the gravity shift isn't all that fun to deal with. When the physics aren't being frustrating, it doesn't feel any different from the stage being at neutral gravity. It's a concept that, were it further developed, could have made for a fun treasure hunting stage, but in execution, disappoints. With this being the culmination of the gameplay style, doesn't really do anything to sell it as a legitimate new mainstay playstyle for the series. The overall design philosophy of treasure hunting shows clear limitations even with SkyDeck's premise. While you change the balance of the ship to unlock new locations, you're doing this in service of finding a singular shard. Since that's the only motivation in doing so, it's not actually an engaging element of design in the stage, and since it's not innate to your control itself, you have to go back to the start of the stage to access the lever. The fact that you have to constantly change it to find other shards makes it nothing but a means of wasting your time. You fly around, find where the shard is, then if you have to, fly all the way back to move the lever, fly back to the shard to get it, rinse and repeat. The backtracking only really serves to prolong the time you spend on the stage, reflecting that they didn't really have a good idea of how to make these stages actually engaging to play through. It's just inoffensive at best. It's only once we get to SA2 where these stages really start to become more detrimental, even though it also has overall better applications of it. In Adventure 2, the inclusion of the gameplay style for Knuckles just feels intrusive. He breaks the emerald apart in a scuffle with Rouge, then proceeds to mainly be focused on getting them back. The way it's set up feels purely like a contrivance to facilitate keeping the gameplay around, giving the impression that this would be a repetitive formula that mandates how Knuckles is played going forward, with it not really doing anything meaningful with his character. It doesn't feel like it fits Knuckles as a permanent gameplay style. However, in direct contrast, they added Rouge in this game. Since they wanted a rival to each playstyle, we got a character who uniquely fits the mold of this gameplay style. Despite that, this was the last instance of the treasure hunting stages in the series. While it's great that Knuckles isn't shackled to it anymore, it then made Rouge feel kind of pointless, making Rouge another one of the series' casts that gradually fell to the wayside. And it's not like Knuckles got much gameplay outside of it either. SA2 has 9 treasure hunting stages, 5 for Knuckles and 4 for Rouge. While they set up Rouge as someone planning to swipe the Master Emerald for herself, only 2 of her stages are spent collecting shards, the first and the last one. This helps set her apart as a character, since her main goal is treasure hunting in general, since she's just a jewel thief, all while working under gun as a spy. Unfortunately, it doesn't really do a lot to change the feel of play mechanically, and that's one of the greater issues with these stages. Her other 2 stages involve hunting keys in Egg Quarters and 3 Chaos Emeralds in Security Hall. Egg Quarters isn't a remotely interesting use of her talents, but Security Hall is. The prospect of collecting Chaos Emeralds in a treasure hunting stage is far more interesting than shards of the Master Emerald. But of course, the design revolves around collecting 3, and usually Chaos Emeralds are collected individually by stage, and there's only 7 of them. So it only gets to be present as a novel concept for one stage. In terms of the actual quality of the stages, it's an improvement over Adventure 1, but not by a ton, unfortunately. Despite there being 9 stages, 4 are almost identical, and 4 are themed similarly, but have meaningful differences in structure to make the stages feel distinctly different from one another. Although they carry the same problems as one another, so I'll start comparing the identical ones. Wild Canyon is Knuckles' first stage and Dry Lagoon is Rouge's. Both stages are extremely simple. Wild Canyon has you start in a dimly lit ruin with a wind tunnel in the center. Said wind tunnel can carry you up into the open surface. There are 2 different directions to go in the outside area of the ruin, but these areas are pretty small. The stage's verticality is what spaces things out. The inside of the ruin has some verticality built in, but it's very easy to clear the stage in about a minute. Dry Lagoon is almost identical in its layout, but has a slightly different structure. Instead of starting in a closed ruin, you start in an open area with plenty of natural light. The area has more verticality than the inside of the ruins, but there's no other directions to go once you reach the top. Instead of having a wind tunnel to carry you to the other section of the stage, there's a turtle you can save by destroying gun robots. Once you save the turtle, you can ride on its back to go to a separate area. This separate area is almost identical to the top area of Wild Canyon, with the only major difference being the underwater section, wherein you can ride another turtle underwater to a hidden area where a shard can spawn. This difference in design is great early on. It does make use of the same exact stage twice, but makes them feel different enough that it's not literally the same exact stage twice. Unfortunately, Dry Lagoon's difference does highlight the biggest issue with the treasure hunting stages in SA2. In SA1, the radar tracked all three at once. This made it really easy to breeze through stages. So in SA2, they changed it to only track one at a time. The thing is, the tracking of three at a time wasn't the problem. It was that the stages were small. So this change comes across more like a needless waste of time, similar to Skydeck's gimmick, making you scan the whole map for a treasure, then repeating the entire scan twice more. Dry Lagoon breaking the stage up into two separate sections makes it take more time to cover ground to find each piece, cycling between both locations to see if the current shard is in which area. Granted, it really isn't that bad in Dry Lagoon, because it's pretty small too, but the structure does immediately make it apparent that this design philosophy is going to cause problems later. This artificially makes stages take longer. Since the stages get bigger in scope, this just makes the stages drag on far longer than they have any right to, because you'll spend so much time just trying to get a ping for each shard, whereas in Adventure 1, you could freely explore the entire stage knowing that every step you take is progress, since you'd always actively be seeking all the pieces. It kept the gameplay flow to feel fast, whereas the new radar actively breaks up that pace, making it needlessly slow. The problem Adventure 1 had was that its stages were all small. When that's paired with a radar tracking all three shards at once, yeah, it's a breeze to clear quickly, but that's because of the scale of the stages. Wild Canyon is another small stage, and it's easy to clear in a minute despite not tracking all three at once. It feels like a horrible overcorrection that wasn't necessary if they were intending to increase the scope of these stages. If they were concerned about balancing the radar around these earlier stages that are much smaller, there wasn't even a need to do this for the entire game. SA2 still has upgrades in it. They could have very easily made a radar upgrade, restoring how it worked in the first game to better fit the scope of the later stages. Instead, we get the gimmick upgrades of the treasure scope and sunglasses that let you see secrets on stages that only really matter for additional stage missions. The other set of twin stages are where the radar's change genuinely becomes a problem. The layout of Death Chamber and Egg Quarters are generally identical, but Knuckles' is far more frustrating. The core gimmick is the stage's layout. They're a set of sections broken up in a triangular design. This makes it so traversal between areas is entirely linear, making it a static length to get to each area, which noticeably makes it longer just to get a reading on your radar, since you'll have to walk through every hallway just to get a ping, then repeat. Being forced to traverse 3 lines of a triangle 3 times isn't a fun experience. Knuckles' version is much more frustrating because it has the hourglasses that you have to constantly bump into in order to traverse the area, eating up more time when you're just trying to check every area. There's no actual depth or engagement to how this gimmick functions. It is just a way to waste your time. On top of that, Knuckles has to deal with more enemies, and the layout isn't connected with straight lines. There are dig spots, but these are only used to functionally connect the lines directly. It's also where they put in the biggest time sink. You have to hit an hourglass that you have to clear a path to. This takes you to a room that connects the 2 sides. This room will have a wall dig area as well as a path to the other side of the stage. The wall dig area in these areas takes you to a hidden room where a key can spawn. Once you go back, you'll quickly realize they did not visually differentiate the 2 directions. So you'll go back the wrong way a lot of the time because they look exactly the same, realize you have to hit the hourglass again, then go back. It purely exists to waste time. The digging isn't used to introduce more shortcuts in traversing the area faster. It just makes it into a frustrating maze if a key is in those areas. There's no real substance to the treasure hunting in the stage. There's a central area that lets you go to each side quicker, but that hardly matters when you have to be searching every nook of every path regardless. And every one of them has the same exact roadblocks that still make it slow to travel to and from. There's different gimmicks to enemies and stage interactives, but there's the same overarching issue that traversal is purely meant to waste your time, with Death Chamber being even more frustrating in how it wastes your time. This reaches an absolute boiling point with the final stages of both characters, although this time around Knuckles has it easier. Meteor Herd is Knuckles' final stage that's set in space. It is massive. You have a large ground level area with destructible objects, then you have the central area. This allows you to go up into the actual space section, where there are multiple different platforms along with floating containers. Even higher up, there's a giant floating structure to explore. The scale of the stage is much bigger, making the radar's limitation extremely frustrating as you'll be wasting a lot of time covering the whole thing 3 times. The biggest problem is the ability of traversal. Going back down to the bottom means you have to slowly ascend back up, just to drop back down again. If there were a more dynamic way to travel between sections, it wouldn't feel like it's designed meant to waste your time. But because it's a large map with a lot of verticality, the stage's design is made miserable by the radar's functionality. But on Meteor Herd, the ascent is linear and easy to access. Mad Space's structure is more straightforward and less frustrating on paper. The starting area is a small platformed area with a couple small platforms scattered out in space beneath it. The starting area has 3 separate rockets that take you to different areas, with some of those areas having another rocket to take you to a separate area, with one that takes you to the very top of the stage. All of these areas can very easily be explored in a short time. Then you can dive off them back to the starting platform to travel to the other areas in theory. The 3 different rockets don't really have a good visual indication as to where they go to, so you'll have to remember where each one goes, something that's hard to do when your perspective of said platform constantly shifts, just like how Death Chamber's intermediate rooms would disorientate you. It's the absolute worst design present in these stages. You can traverse between the other locations directly in some of the areas, but it doesn't exactly make the experience smooth sailing either. Because of Mad Space's gimmick, each area is a planetoid with its own gravity and gravitational pull. As a result, it can be annoying to break off back to the main platform, with you still being pulled in by its gravity. And some of them are very janky to actually traverse their whole surface. There's even the lower and top areas of the stage, which are massive spread out areas that just eat up a ton of time to scan. Covering the whole ground of the map takes an obscene amount of time, so the fact the radar only tracks one at a time makes it an absolute nightmare to do this stage. When replaying the stage to get footage, it took me 7 minutes searching high and low just to get the first emerald ping. The realization I'd have to repeat that process again felt miserable. SA2 carried over the hint system, but without Tikal, it's clearly lost its luster. Other than being boring for lore as just simple screens with hints, they've been severely nerfed. Instead of showing you the direction of the shard, it gives you a cryptic hint as to where it is, and you can get 2 more hints afterwards, with the 3rd hint being a more explicit description of the location. Because this tanks your score on stages, and is generally useless unless you get the 3rd hint, you won't bother to use the system. My first time replaying the stages this time around, I A-ranked all of Rouge's stages first try, no problem, save for Mad Space. The hint system almost feels like it becomes crucial because of Mad Space's layout and jank. It took me 6 minutes on my first try, and while I was pretty lucky with spawns, I'd say half the time was spent wrestling with the controls traversing the areas. If you try to use the hint system on the stage, you'll learn that it has quirks unique to this stage specifically. The one time where it seems useful, the game literally designs it to lie to you. If it says it's at the lowest point, it actually means it's at the highest point. It can also just throw out the location, but written backwards. This would have been fine, cool even as a mix-up, but since it's worthless the whole game, there isn't a mix-up, because that would imply you used it to begin with to have noticed a difference. It just feels like an insult for utilizing the mechanic when it finally has a use. While the later stages may be frustrating, the other stages are actually solid. Security Hall is Rouge's only exclusive stage, although it's similar to Aquatic Mine in concept. Despite that, it's stylistically and visually different enough that I didn't even notice until I really thought about it. Funnily enough, I made the connection once I mentally compared both of them to Skydeck, since both stages adapt the same design philosophy into something far more engaging. Security Hall has Rouge collecting 3 Chaos Emeralds from Gun's base, with a hard 5-minute timer on the stage. The stage is broken up into 3 simple floors: the ground floor and upper area, which both contain safe blocks, and the safe control room that's up top. The safe control room requires a pulley to enter and has multiple enemies throughout, wherein there are 3 areas with a switch to unlock a set block of safes from the lower floors. All these paths have infrared lasers and enemies planted around the switch. They really set the stage up as a grand heist. The Chaos Emeralds can be locked away in a set safe block. Rouge can then dig into these to get the Chaos Emeralds. However, this requires going to the top of the stage and hitting a switch to enable the block that the emerald is locked in. And you can only have 1 block unlocked at a time. The stage doesn't really rely on this gimmick, and honestly, it's for the best it doesn't, because it would just be a repeat of Skydeck, finding the safe that it's hidden behind, going all the way back up to hit a switch, going back to get it, then rinse and repeat. The accessibility to said area and layout of the stage makes it a far more engaging experience than Skydeck, so it actually works out well in this context. The rest of the stage is very easy to traverse and explore quickly, so every other spawn of the Chaos Emeralds is a fine standard hunt. Despite that easy hunt, the fact that it's on a timer actually adds a new dynamic in pushing you to be quick. Although, even when playing like a baboon, I never ran out of time. So it's not like it actually puts pressure on you. Regardless, it still is neat though. The overall design and presentation of the stage really sets Security Hall apart from every other treasure hunting stage. It's just a shame none of the other treasure hunting stages have as much appeal to them. Aquatic Mine is Knuckles' stage that adapts the Skydeck philosophy, and the results are a little more mixed. Like Security Hall, the stage's size makes it great for this type of design, and the gimmick is a great way to add depth to it. Where Security Hall had you hitting a switch at the top of the stage to open a safe block, Aquatic Mine has you hitting switches to change the water level on the stage. This is similar to Skydeck's directional gravity gimmick, but is far easier to interact with in the stage, while also doing far more to change the feel of gameplay. The water introduces actual different traversal through the stage, preventing the dynamic change of environment from feeling purely like a waste of time, as there's actual purpose behind it beyond just unlocking new areas. Of course, water traversal isn't exactly fun, especially when you can drown. So this stage introduces the air necklace, making it so water isn't a hassle to traverse. But sadly, just like Skydeck, this change doesn't meaningfully change traversal. This is because, like Security Hall, the gimmick isn't really that important to engage with to clear the stage. But unlike Security Hall, the stage is entirely built around this core gimmick. On one attempt of the stage, I noticed an emerald shard in a place I couldn't reach normally, but realized if you raise the water level, it's entirely possible to swim there. Then after doing that, there was a platform in the way instead, undermining the actual dynamic impact the water level had on the stage. There are some spawn locations that do make this dynamic environment matter, but it feels inconsequential more often than not. Many of the other times I played, there wasn't really a need to fiddle with the water levels more than once. For the most part, you're incentivized to just drop the water level down to the bottom and scope out every area then. Since you can't dig while underwater, you can't get any emerald shards hidden in the walls or the ground. Since there are areas with platforms blocking them, you have to lower the water to access them. There's very little gameplay incentive to utilize water filling the areas, while there are a mountain of reasons why you should just drain it, undermining what would have been an otherwise great idea for a treasure hunting stage. Which is a real shame, because the stage plays switches throughout rather than in one area. So there wasn't the design concern of needing to go all the way to the top multiple times. But even then, the stage was pretty small, so even that traversal wouldn't be a big deal. Lastly, we have the peak of Knuckles' stages, Pumpkin Hill. While this stage is mostly known for its song, playing through it again, I came to realize that it was the best type of design for treasure hunting stages. Pumpkin Hill is pretty big, but is very open and simple. While it has some verticality, it's very easy to quickly travel to the top. giving you a perfect vantage point for hunting since you can glide around and explore. It doesn't take a lot of time to scan the stage for shard locations. The stage layout highlights the best element of this gameplay. When it's quick and easy to travel to the highest point, being able to just glide around to do the scanning makes it much more satisfying to play. The fact Knuckles and Rouge can glide around is sort of taken for granted in their general gameplay, usually being used very briefly for basic purposes. Since Pumpkin Hill is very open, you get to glide all around the stage casually for an effective scan, which then allows you to quickly focus on searching for the Emerald Shard. Pumpkin Hill is also where you get the Shovel Claws, which is worth mentioning because it's where I found another annoyance with hints. While digging for an Emerald Shard, there was a hint in that area, and going to dig registered using that hint, worsening my score for no reason. Other than this, digging does have some other issues. Honestly, I don't know why they bothered to have digging in the game. You can't visibly see the shards around the map a lot of the time, so it's not like hiding it in the literal stage is hiding them more. If anything, it's frustrating since you literally can't spot one that the radar isn't currently tracking. It only serves as a bit of an annoyance for hunting, since you'll get an exclamation over your head in an open area, then constantly dig in the same small radius until it eventually hits it. It's not that bad, but it really doesn't add anything to the gameplay experience. I legitimately didn't even think about it until writing this part of the script, which is the best way to segue into talking about the overall feel of these stages. Here's a tier list. As you'll notice, not a single one I would consider genuinely good as an actual stage. That's the thing. Even at their best, I really don't think they add gameplay substance. Despite being in 2 games, they didn't really find a good balance in how to make these stages into something that is fun to play. The most you get is an inkling of something interesting. I don't think the game mode is impossible to make fun, I just think they couldn't really find a way to harness all the design elements into something that was fun. Considering this was the end of the playstyle's tenure, they either thought it was impossible, or just chose to move on and cut their losses. Since the game mode was primarily attached to Knuckles, and was clearly showing diminishing returns, it seems like dropping it was a logical decision regardless. Do I think these stages could make a comeback? Not really. There's clearly been no interest or desire to return to this gameplay style, amongst Sega itself and even fans, as I can't recall of ever hearing a fan project that revolved around treasure hunting. It just doesn't seem like there's any chance of it happening. Considering how Sega feels the constant need to remind everyone they have no desire to remake the adventure titles, it's entirely possible we never revisit this gameplay. Although I wouldn't say treasure hunting has died off as a whole in the series, as it sort of inadvertently has a spiritual successor in Frontiers. Frontiers opted to have open world sections of gameplay, with it being an evolution of Adventure 1's adventure fields. In these sections, they added collectathon elements to the design. It feels like an unintended spiritual successor to the treasure hunting stages, by not making collecting everything a focal point of the gameplay, but rather an incentive for exploring the environment, only focusing on the Chaos Emeralds. It felt far more engaging. You were choosing to collect other items for bonuses, as well as story progression, and the general loop of collecting was more rooted in the exploration itself, rather than purely clear time. It meaningfully fleshes out the treasure hunting aspect by attaching it to these open world sections. It breaks up the pace of the game while giving reasons to explore these open areas, with them also structuring you to gather Chaos Emeralds to go supersonic against bosses for each area. The entire game revolves around this gameplay loop. It's supplemental, rather than a core focus, and it works really well in that context. These open world sections aren't purely comprised of this treasure hunting gameplay. There's actual combat with enemies and bosses that feel fun and interactive. It manages to adapt this treasure hunting gameplay into something fun. I imagine the resentment for the treasure hunting stage was because they were tied to Knuckles. He's a beloved character defined more by his namesake. Tying his gameplay to treasure hunting prevented him from really utilizing his actual key feature. It didn't really suit him as a character, leaving it to feel like he was being wasted as a character. Putting him in a scenario where combat is the core of his gameplay is a more appealing gameplay role for his character. The problem is, everyone but Sonic got left to rot after 06. I think the premise of a dedicated treasure hunting game featuring Rouge sounds interesting, maybe even making it something more akin to Sly Cooper. It'd be a great way to actually do something with her character independently, while also taking a chance to focus a full game on fleshing out treasure hunting. I think it's the only way people would actually be interested in it returning. But considering they've shown little interest in doing anything with Rouge, and are actively retconning her tits away, I don't think it's likely she gets that chance. Especially when it seems like Sega doesn't have any interest in a dedicated game for anyone but Sonic, with Shadow only now getting back that privilege. While treasure hunting may never make a true return, I'll still miss it. Even if it wasn't exactly a great gameplay style with what we were given, I still find that they have a unique charm to them. One that makes me believe they can be good, but it seems as though they'll just be left as a relic of the past, given their reputation. This retrospective gave me more respect for these stages, and I think that's what really matters. Because while they may have not been treasures themselves, they're still a big part of the adventure experience, and that's more valuable than any treasure. The max stages genuinely suck though.